Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to Founders Floor. Thanks for everybody. I see a lot of familiar faces. I see a lot of new faces too, so we like both kinds. So thanks everybody for coming.
I like that you learn how to say old faces and new faces.
No, I know.
Nobody's old at Founders Floor.
Yeah, sensitive to that now. I wonder why. So my name is Matt Day, and I'm Managing Director of Founders Floor. And this is our speaker series and networking event. This is an event that we co-manage with a good partner in ours in Lifograph and Dave Wilson. Everybody knows Dave Wilson. And so this is an event we put on every month. It's focused on bringing in a seasoned entrepreneur or investor to come to talk about issues related to startup and entrepreneurship. And our goal for this type of event is for founders and entrepreneurs like yourself to be able to walk away from the event, learning a couple new things that you haven't known before that you can apply to your own startup company or your own entrepreneurial career, to be able to be inspired and encouraged to be the best entrepreneur that you can be, and to be able to make new connections, meet up with folks of like mind and peers, and increase your network, entrepreneurial network. So I hope everybody gets a lot of great value out of our events. We have another excellent speaker tonight again. But before we introduce our speaker, I'd like to talk a little bit about our sponsors. We have just a couple sponsors on the side here, and I'll mention a few things about Founders Floor. Founders Floor is a co-working accelerator for startups and entrepreneurs. We provide a startup ecosystem to help tech startups build their business and accelerate their growth, ultimately just increase your probability for success. And so we do that by providing three main services to all of our members. And that's, first and foremost, is just a complete office environment. Everything you need in your office as part of your startup to run your company is here part of the membership. Desk chairs, high-speed internet, conference rooms. We have a 1 gigabit per second internet connection here. Then we layer strategic partnerships on top of that. All of our partners provide free services. Amazon AWS, free cloud computing up to $5,000. Salesforce.com, enterprise accounts, Braintree PayPal, free credit card processing. About $10,000 to $15,000 worth of just free services as part of our membership. And then lastly is funding opportunities. So when our startups are ready to raise a seed round of funding, and it's a startup we'd like to work more closely with, we help introduce them to angel investors along with VCs who invest in the seed stage. And then we ourselves as Founders Floor also invest in the seed stage as well. So I think it's one of the things that, it's not a service, but it's things that just organically grows here is the entrepreneurial community that we built here, being able to work along like-minded entrepreneurs like yourself, being able to bounce ideas off each other. That's something that's really important in early stage startup companies' life, and that's one of the things that people value as a member here.
And go to happy hour on Fridays.
And happy
Yay.
hour. So we do a lot of different events. It's pretty fun. So other great partners that we have is Lifograph and Dea. And you were, I think, number 2 member, I think, in Lifograph.
I'm always number 1, baby.
Number 1. Sorry, I got that wrong again. So, but you want to say a little something about Lifograph?
Sure, Lifograph. Who has heard of Lifograph? Okay, good. Who has not heard of Lifograph? You may leave now. Just kidding. Lifograph is Wikipedia people and companies. We are building a crowdsourced platform to curate information about people and companies and their connections as well, right? We're focusing on Silicon Valley, venture capitalists, angel investors, startup entrepreneurs, startups, tech companies. And we are now almost to launch the public beta. I know I've been threatening with it for quite a bit of time, but we had to rebuild the platform from ground up. But it's coming. So in the meantime, we like to do events like these, and it's very exciting because I love to see entrepreneurs working on exciting startups that eventually we can write about on Lifograph, right? And I encourage you to sign up for beta. Sign up to be either a curator or just a beta user. It's free. And you can go to lifograph.com and sign up for free. I also want to tell you about a couple events that are coming up. We're going to be here again on Tuesday, so next Tuesday at Founders Floor for a startup matchup. This is a really fun event. It's like kind of karaoke style, right?
Yeah.
Everybody comes here and they give a little pitch about what they do, about what they need,
Yep.
right? Maybe you need a co-founder, you need services for design or web development, and how they can help others. So, we all have something to offer. What can you offer to the community? And then we go around in the big general networking session. But it's a lot of fun, and
We have beer and wine too.
we have beer and wine. Okay, you guys totally should come. I wish the night was one of those nights. I always wish when I go to a meetup that they provide wine and beer. So that's for next Tuesday on. Okay, let's see what I have here. We have a pitch event in San Francisco. Who came all the way from San Francisco here? Woohoo! Can I hear woohoo for San Francisco people? Fighting the traffic to come here. It's not easy feat, okay? So you guys rock. And that event is in San Francisco with an angel investor and VC at Bloomberg Capital. If you are looking for funding, come to San Francisco on Thursday, and you get to pitch your idea for a couple minutes. Get to meet the investors. We get some. It's at WeWork in downtown San Francisco. It's really good. And then another one that I haven't announced, but we're gonna announce it pretty soon, is a elevator pitch workshop. Right, like this 90 seconds. What do you say in 90 seconds? It's hard to grab VC's attention in 90 seconds, but that's their attention span. So how do you do that, right? So we're gonna have a workshop with a pitch coach, and at the end of the workshop, you're gonna know exactly what to say at one of these, fast pitch programs. So I'm gonna announce it, and I hope you'll come and join us on December 2nd.
I'll be here, I think, right? No, that's a different one.
Yeah,
January.
that's it, yeah.
Okay. We do a lot of events
And we're also preparing a holiday party here. So stay on the lookout for a fun holiday party at Founders Floor in December. All right. So I would like to invite now a friend of mine. He is an investor, and also, come sit down. He's also a sponsor of ours tonight. And let's see, who didn't get a T-shirt? Who didn't get a T-shirt tonight? Everybody got one T-shirt? Look on the back. Those are yours, courtesy of Ken. Kenny, come here. Ken is an investor. He's also an entrepreneur, a future author, and a good friend of mine. So why don't you tell us what's going on with these T-shirts, Ken?
Well, I'm glad to be here, and I've traveled a long way, and yes, from San Francisco, from my hotel and my rent-a-car, but I'm really from New York, and I love San Francisco and the West Coast and the Valley, and it's really just an amazing culture. And these accelerators and these networking events are truly so empowering, because you get to learn from people things that have taken a lifetime to learn. And no matter how successful you are, you can still learn. And I reached out to Dea and went to one of her events and went to see a speaker who I really never heard of, and he was just amazing. I was blown away, but it really opened up my eyes to just, hey, these events are just phenomenal. And when I saw Dea was having another event and that you were speaking, George, and I connected with you on LinkedIn. Like when you're going to one of these events, the first thing that you do is you look at who's attending and see a little bit about them, and if there's somebody that you want to reach out to and connect with, and do a little background research and have some conversation point of engagement. And that's what Ringley does. We help businesses, really business to business businesses, enterprise software and things like that, find engagement opportunities with companies, and companies are really people, and find those people and find like common denominators where you have something to have a meaningful conversation. And I think that the t-shirts over there were brought here by me, and feel comfortable taking as many as you want. I was at an event in San Francisco, and we had a few extras, so I brought them down, and hope you guys can bring them all to your companies and help brand us. But I'm glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to hearing George's speech and meeting the rest of you who I haven't met. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Ken. Okay, so I know you're from New York, but you said you love San Francisco and you love the Valley, so I won't hold that against you. So yeah, thanks so much for the T-shirts as well. And you mentioned you did some background check or whatever. Is anyone in the audience who has a felony record? Is there anything you found or?
No.
Okay, good. So everybody can stay. And I would say that without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker tonight. And George and I, we met like 2-3 years ago, I think. One of the things that impressed me the most about him is how successful he was, and yet how humble and how willing to help others. I was telling him what I was doing, and immediately say, "Oh yeah, I know this guy. I can introduce you to this guy," right? So, for such a successful person to basically help just somebody like nobody, it was, to put the time into it. It was very touching. We stayed in touch, and in the meantime, he sold yet another company, and so I'm like, wow, what a great speaker. Why don't you come and share your story with us? So, as you saw from the event description, sold 4 companies, raised $500 million from super, high-level VCs. He's reached revenues of over $2 billion, right? So many unicorns there, probably, right? So I would love to hear the story, and same with the audience. Would love to hear anything that you can share with us about your journey, lessons learned, advice. Without further ado, let's welcome George Northup. Woohoo! Woohoo! Yes.
Okay, I just have to make a phone call, but I'll be right back. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so I'm 23 years old. I used to have a lot more hair, jet black hair, and this is what entrepreneurial stuff does to you. So anyway, incidentally, I don't like using a mic, but Matt says I have to because they're recording this. So I hate rules. What I thought I'd do is, so one thing I want to say is that I'm really an entrepreneur at heart, and I'm from the East Coast originally. So I was born in Tokyo, lived there, and then mostly grew up in the New Jersey suburbs. And I've been out here since 2000. And I don't know how it feels for you guys, but when I'm driving up and down and I see Google or Yahoo, I always say to myself, I can't believe I'm in Silicon Valley, and we have this fantastic weather and all these companies and these incredible people. But it's really a dream to be here, and it's great to be here with fellow entrepreneurs. And so I love working with entrepreneurs and love what you're doing with your companies. What I thought I'd do is, number one, let's make this interactive. We have one more kind of person on the panel coming, James Lim. He's an investment banker. That's why he's late. He didn't plan. He's stuck on 280 somewhere. So when he comes, let's really give him a big cheer and just make him feel uncomfortable when he comes in. So let's make this interactive, so that as I'm talking, just raise your hand if you want to make a comment or question, and let's make it very back and forth, because it's a chance for us to talk about what you're doing. What I thought I'd do is just tell you a little about my career background, and then also just tell you some anecdotes about the many near-death experiences I've had career-wise. And there's a lot of romance around Silicon Valley, which is that you come to Silicon Valley and you write a business plan on a Post-it and then show it to someone on Sand Hill Road. They wire you the money, and the next day Google buys you for $10 billion, and then you go start the next one. And obviously it's a lot harder than that. So just my career, I went to Duke University on the East Coast. I was kind of like a liberal arts major, and I took one accounting course, which was enough to get me into this firm, Deloitte. One thing that's funny is I remember on my first day I came back and said, I really hate this. This is a really boring job. And so I stayed there for like another 6 years, and I became a CPA and consultant and everything else like that. And we had big Fortune 100 clients. It's funny because in today's world, a millennial would just like quit that day and leave, And so it's funny because one of my staff, I was telling him that I stayed there for 6 years and I hated the job. He's like, why don't you just leave that day, what I was telling him was that in the prehistoric times, we actually stayed with a job for a while to build a career. I was at Deloitte for the first, let's say, 5 or 6 years. Very boring, but also very, very good foundation for me in learning how to be financial issues and accounting and all these other things. And so it was a good building block for me. And then I went to my first startup in the late 80s in Washington, D.C. The company was a systems integrator. Does anybody know what a systems integrator is? Yeah. Millennials, again, will not know this, but in the prehistoric times, you actually had to network computers and load them with software and connect them to Ethernet and all this other stuff. So I went to a client as the CFO, and it was a small company in Washington, D.C., and they had about 30 people, and we're doing about 3 or 4 million in revenues, and a very, very tiny company. And in Washington, there are no entrepreneurs or anything else like this. And this is the 80s, And so it's kind of funny because when I told one of my friends I was going to do this, the first thing they said is, "What if you lose your job?" And it's kind of a funny reaction because number one, I wasn't worried about the downside. I was thinking about the upside. And also my attitude was, I'll get another job. That's what will happen, And it was kind of my first recognition that entrepreneurs are different, which is we're willing to go to the edge and we don't worry about the downside as much. But it's funny, I think particularly more on the West or the East Coast, I think people are a little more conservative with careers than they are out here, whereas people here will take the plunge, and that's one of the beauties of Silicon Valley. At any rate, this company, I was there for about a year, and then we won a $1 billion contract to supply the Army with computers worldwide, and we became a $200 million company in 2 years. And I think we were making about $30 million a year in profits, and there were about 200 people. So anyway, that was my first startup, and I remember thinking, oh, it's so easy, this is great. And anyway, it was a remarkable period and very, very interesting from a growth standpoint. The next big thing I did was internet banking company in the mid-90s in Washington, D.C. also. And I wanted to do an IPO, and then does anybody remember what it was like in the 90s, late 90s? Yeah. So it was a very frothy period, even more frothy than now, I think. And so it was funny because I was living in Dallas at the time, but I'd been recruited by this company and internet banking, and I really hadn't had that much exposure. This is around 95 or 96 to the internet. But I remember thinking the internet's going to be big and banking is going to be big, so I'm going to take the plunge. And the founder called me and he said, before you move for this company, I just want you to know we lost all of our support from investors, and so we only have 30 days of cash left. And he said, so I needed to disclose that to you before you go any further. And yeah. So 30 days left. Yeah. And so anyway, I said, yeah, I'll be there next week. And so I went to this company with kind of a imperfect technology. Today it would be called a SaaS internet or banking SaaS company. So our customers were mid-sized banks, and on their behalf we offered internet banking and bill payment to consumers. And the company had basically been around for 6 years, no revenues, no customers. The platform did not work, and I still took the job. And I was there for about 5 years, but anyway, kind of around the clock, raised money for this company fairly desperately, and we had I would say a really bad CTO. Is this being recorded? The guy was an MIT undergraduate and a Stanford MBA. The worst CTO I've ever worked with. He never delivered anything on time, and it never worked. And also terrible UIs. Anyone who's a CTO, raise your hand. Do not do the product. The CTO always thinks they know what the customer wants. They don't. The technical person never does. Get a product person. But so at any rate, over a 5-year period, though, we raised $100 million, and we went public in 99 or 2000 with JP Morgan. And then that company today was eventually acquired, but is now serving 15% of U.S. households in about 17 of the top 50 U.S. banks. But some funny things that happened while I was there was several things. One is that we were about to go public in the late 90s, and I was on the roadshow with JP Morgan, and they fly you around on a little jet. It's really nice for the first couple of days, but you just go to meetings all the time around the country, and then people beat you up in these meetings. and they buy your stock. I mean, that's what a roadshow is, basically. But as the roadshow is starting, the CTO calls me up, the Stanford MBA guy, and he says, the system died. And so we're about to go public, and we're kind of like a Schwab or whatever. We have people using the system, and he said, the system died, and this is at midnight before the roadshow. And I'm going, well, what happened? He goes, I don't know. And yes.
So what is your role?
I was the number 2 guy, so I was the CFO and the COO working with the founder. Yeah. And so so anyway, he says, I don't know why it died, but the system's dead. And so if you can imagine today, if let's say Schwab went out, or let's say Zillow just stopped for several days. It's kind of like that. And so we start going to the roadshow, and then they lock about 70 engineers in a room, and they're all trying to figure out what happened, and they don't know. So they're working around the clock, and I'm on the roadshow, and so my memory was, we decided to keep going, and my memory was I was kind of like dancing like this, like, you know, here's the company story, and everything is really good, kind of doing the dance. But my own image was, if you can picture a Roman temple collapsing inwards, like a Greek or Roman temple. And so I was up there dancing and pitching the company, but behind me I was thinking about this Roman temple collapsing in on me like this. And after 72 hours, they fixed it, and the system went back live. In those times, people were not always checking their personal accounts and things like that. So it was intermittent enough that we didn't get blown away by it or anything else like that. Now, what was funny was in the forensic analysis, this is what happened to our system. The first coder, when he was writing the code, put in only 2 digits for the number of banks that were customers. So this was great until bank number 99, and then we hit bank number 100. So that's why the system died, because the first coder said, we'll never have 100. So, as I said, So look, here's the most important lesson. Never let that technology guy do any design or anything like that. So, but I just remember that as like, basically like, holy shit, I'm going to kill that guy. So, anyway.
I have a question for you. So what made you take the job when you knew everything was so bad? No customer, no revenue, nothing. What made you wish to take it?
Yeah, his question is, why did I take this job?
Yeah.
It's a very good question. Now, I think the reason was that at that career stage, I was like in my my early 30s, and I had made a decision. I need to do an IPO. I want to do an IPO and raise money at a higher level and do a public company. And so that was really what drew me at this, because it was the internet and it was banking, and I knew these things would happen. You know, and what's interesting is, we can talk about this more, but today, you know, I think that a lot of companies out there that are being funded, somebody says, I have an idea and I'm going to build it, and then after that happens, and then after they raise money, they go, I'm going to go find a customer, revenues after that. And that's quite common. For me personally, I really gravitate towards, I think there's a need here, and I'm going to build something for that. So despite all the imperfections, I just felt like if we can get this out there, you know, we'll be successful, and so bore out. Yeah.
It looks like you have a lot of faith, because there was no product, product was not working, people, no process, no people, no technology. So.
Well, they had those things, but they're really bad. yeah. So, but yeah, and this is, you know, you have to be an optimist to be an entrepreneur.
Okay.
There are, I've worked with a wide range of
optimism is okay.
Yeah, there are a wide range of people I've worked with throughout my career, and I've worked with Harvard MBAs, people from McKinsey. I've worked with people who I call street entrepreneurs, who don't come from the Stanford pedigree, and you have to be optimistic. And there's some people where I would say to them, I want you to either take Prozac or take more Prozac, or you can't work with me because you're too depressing to be around. And there was one person where they were so negative. I said, every time you say something negative, I'm going to say blue, just to remind you. And so I would be around the person going, blue, 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 blue. Anyway, they eventually left. But you have to be an optimist. So another interesting, there were many things that happened, but another time, incidentally, so I've raised $500 million in money over the years. My average cash balance in my company has been 0, and I'm not kidding. So when I was at this banking company, the CTO was always expanding the staff, and there's like the word budget had no meaning for the guy, and so his burn rate would exceed my fundraising capability, and I would actually close the funding and start the next one and start calling people, and I did that for many years. And then even when I did an IPO, we had to do another funding after that. But another thing that happened that was very funny was that for those of you really old, AOL was a big company in Washington, D.C. in the 90s particularly. The founder was James Kimsey, and at the time he was worth several $billion. And he owned a bar, which is how he started. And so we're in the middle of raising money, and once again, this banking company is out of money. And I'm trying to put together a retail round, which is just get a few small individuals to write me checks so I can make payroll. And so I run into this guy, James Kimsey, and he's worth $2 billion. And anyway, we're just having a drink together talking. And I just said, do you ever invest in companies? And he goes like, yeah. And so I tell him about 10 seconds of it. He goes, don't worry, just call my secretary tomorrow and I'll write you a check. That was it. So I'm like, God, this is great. So the next morning I call his assistant up, and it turns out she's authorized to invest on his behalf. And she said, I asked her what he usually does, and she says, usually like 25,000. And I said, I think you should do 50. And she's like, that's fine, okay. And, oh yeah.
What's his number?
Well, he's kind of in the Cayman Islands now, I think, or something like that, or in Singapore. So anyway, I'm like, this is great. I think this will close my gap for payroll next week. And I think then our controller tells me, well, we need to have the checks the next 2 days because we've got to make payroll by the end of the week, actually. So then I call up the assistant and I said to her, hi, this is George again, and I'm sorry, but in order to get into this round, we have to get the check today because there's a cutoff. So I'm going to send someone over to pick up the check right away. I'm going to send a courier. And she goes, okay, that's fine. So anyway, I called the controller and say, get over to this address right now, get the check and cash it immediately. And so anyway, he did, and that enables us to make payroll that week. But see how random it is. I'll just tell you one other story related to this company. So in summer of 1998, we wanted to go public. And the markets cracked. There was something having to do with I think it was Long-Term Capital was this big hedge fund which created a big fissure in the economy and started a very unstable stock market. So anyway, killed all IPOs that summer. And so anyway, we were out of money, and we had been counting on doing an IPO to make it. And so as always, I was going to bars trying to find people to raise money or whatever you do. And so anyway, I get this phone call, and this is like November, right before Thanksgiving. It's Thanksgiving week, and this guy's on the line. My assistant goes, Dr. Ralph Ryback is on your line, and I'm like, who is he? And she goes, I don't know. So anyway, I take the call, and this guy says to me, this is Dr. Ralph Ryback. Yay! And now, in conclusion, I wish you a very good career. Bankers are always like, I'm just telling my story, and then we'll turn over to you. We'll introduce him in a second.
This is karaoke night. Did you know that?
Yeah. The other thing that happened, so we're out of money, and it's Thanksgiving week, and this psychiatrist, Ralph Ryback, calls me up, and he says, do you ever take investments? And I'm like, who are you? And he goes, well, I'm a psychiatrist in the area, but I do angel investing, and I have a lot of rich friends. Would you be interested? Would you take an investor? And I say, wait a second. And so anyway, I go, well, we're very selective about whose money we take, but I'd be willing to see you guys. So the day after Thanksgiving, I'm in this really rich guy's house, a real estate magnate in Washington, D.C. He's one of the biggest developers on the East Coast, with several of his rich friends. And once again, I'm tap dancing. And I put on a suit. And I was very suspicious of these guys. They just, they were real estate guys. They didn't know technology and all these other things. But anyway, I met with them, and then I got a $1 million commitment for these guys. And then using that, I built it as an anchor to go out and do a $5 million round based on this lead. And so we closed that round on December 31st before New Year's, and then we went public the following spring. But literally, we were out of cash Thanksgiving week, and then this crackpot psychiatrist calls me up and then take the call. One of the things I want to say is that I think as an entrepreneur you have to be opportunistic and look at every opportunity. I'm just going to fast forward a little bit and then let James tell him about it himself. So after the IPO, came out to work for Kleiner Perkins out here for one of their portfolio companies in 2000, January 2000, and we were at the height of the dot-com era. And we had free Sobe drinks and back rubs before they were really popular, and dog shampoos and stuff like that. And what was really funny was the two co-founders, so I was the CFO and COO again, the two co-founders were Harvard MBAs and McKinsey guys, and had never been managers before. And we had about 120 people in this office, and the company was in financial analytics at a very abstract level. But we had no revenues, we had no products, we had no strategy, but we had 120 people. And what really struck me was that everybody was working around the clock, like 7 days a week, and having meetings with each other. The other thing is that it was the time of the Palm 4, for anyone who remembers. And so everybody's out there writing graffiti like, "My guy will call your girl, we will meet," they're transmitting like this. And so everyone's meeting around the clock. Again, no business plan, no strategy, no revenues, and we had $50 million in cash in the bank from Kleiner Perkins. Our interest income was about $3 million a year, and it exceeded our revenues. And the other thing was that really struck me was that once a week our receptionist would send out an email, "Everyone, please place your orders for office supplies." And so everybody would order like hundreds of pens, pads, folders, and things like that. There's this. We practically had to have a separate building to hold our supplies and stuff. But anyway, I told her never to order supplies again and never to announce it. And then what's funny is that I still have a huge box of pens from that company, and that was we stopped ordering supplies in 2000. And so, but you know what my point is that several things. One is the startup is that it's a marathon with sprints. And there's a tendency for everybody to say, "I'm working. Are you working? I'm working. We're hustling." It's not about that. It's about focus and execution on the right stuff, and it's about a marathon. And that's who's gonna make it. And so we're gonna see a shakeout over the next 2 to 3 years. And those that are focused with a business plan and actually revenues and customers are gonna make it. But it's funny because I'm working with these Harvard MBAs, and everybody's working around waving their arms, and we eventually cut the company down to 20 people and built a fairly good product and sold it to D&B. We're doing about $600 million a year in revenues, but we did it with 20 people in 6 months and stuff like that. Just to fast forward, did a company called Memeo, which was in the Dropbox space, Dropbox for small business. And basically, it was the turnaround, but we took it from 0 to like 15 million, sold it in March of 2014. I took a year off, and then I just started my latest gig as CEO of a company called Author It, which is enterprise software for life sciences. And what's really amazing is I know nothing about life sciences. And please erase that part. I want our customers are like Amgen and Pfizer. I want them to think I know about life sciences. But I don't want to say it. It's just another software company. And but it's kind of a young company doing 15 million a year. We have offices in New Zealand, Amsterdam, Seattle, and here. I just got off an 11-day road trip for raising money offshore. So anyway, so
What's the company?
It's called Author IT. Yeah. So, but it's interesting. I took a year off and traveled to Europe and the Middle East with my family. It was great. But I think because of DNA, I couldn't stay away. So I'm back here doing it again. So let's go to James. He'll tell about himself, and then yes.
I have a question. At what point do the startups need to take a CFO or CEO in their startup journey?
So the question is, when do you need, as a startup, when to hire a CFO or CEO? As far as the CFO, I think honestly, you need. You basically need a bookkeeper in the early days just to track your money, and most companies today are very payroll driven as opposed to complex accounting systems. You basically have payroll. So I think the first time you really might need a CFO or even a controller, is when you take your first institutional money from a venture capitalist and they raise the bar on reporting and analysis and stuff like that. And more often the CFO is a later hire in the organization. As far as the CEO, I think founders should try to take the company as far as they can. They're often the spirit behind the product and the vision and stuff. At some point, I think founders may have a self-realization that they somehow may not have all the managerial and strategic skills to take it to another level, or their investors might tell them one of the two. But that's how it usually goes. So, James.
Yeah, hi, my name is James Lem. So,
Hey!
yeah, I'm
Thanks for
sorry
coming.
for being so late.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, we're almost done, aren't we? So, I'm not nearly as eloquent or funny as George, but yeah. So, I've actually known George for, gosh, probably about 15 years at this point. So, I'm a career investment banker, about 25, 28 years. On the investment banking side, worked primarily for middle market investment banks. Originally started out at what is now UBS Securities. But then spent about 10 years at Piper Jaffray, helped open up their Silicon Valley office out here, focused solely on technology, ran their software investment banking group and the e-commerce investment banking group there. And then did a couple other stints at various places like Cantor Fitzgerald to start up their technology investment banking group, as well as KeyBank Capital Markets, a bank based out of Cleveland, Ohio. It's the 10th largest bank in the United States, and currently I am doing my own shingle, and I actually did sell George's most recent company, Memio, along with helping him kind of think through some of the financing options that he has available now for his current company. So.
Excellent. Let's see. I'll just make some other comments about fundraising. We'll talk about fundraising a lot, but I think that I talked to a lot of entrepreneurs about fundraising, and the basic question is like, how do you do this? So I'll just talk about that briefly and let James talk about it. I will say James is extremely experienced and extremely skilled, although he typically deals with more mature companies that have legs to it and some revenue base, and might exit for anything from $50 to $300, $400 million or something like that. But for an entrepreneur, I'm asked all the time, how do you raise money? And I think fundamentally, the toolkit for fundraising is you have a pitch deck. It should be no longer than 15 pages. It should explain the problem you're solving, the solution you're bringing, the market opportunity, the numbers behind it, and who you are. And it should not be more than 15 pages. Also, very importantly, more pictures than words, and very few bullet points. Most people put all the individual lines on there and stuff like that. Also, you need a one-page teaser so that you can just send somebody a quick summary that one page says, this is what I do. And you also need one paragraph, which is, like for me, it's authored as a enterprise software company for life sciences companies or something like that. Those are the basic tools that you need. And just writing it will help you articulate what you're thinking about. And I think the basic starting point, particularly in Silicon Valley, is everybody knows somebody who's an investor, either angel or otherwise. And so I think the basic path is to get out there and network, especially for angel money, and it's to contact people that you know and say, I have an idea, I'm in the process of raising money. Do you have any advice, suggestions, or could you make some introductions for me? And even when people say no, you say, do you have any other people you think I should talk to? And so it's basically a networking reach, and that's really how you do this. If you go to the institutional level, it's going up one bar into the VCs. Any questions about that? And then I'll ask James to any questions about the fundraising?
What do you look for in an investor?
Money. Yeah. He asked, what do you look for in an investor? And so, so at this banking company I worked, the guy was a Harvard MBA. He was a very senior executive originally from Chemical Bank, which at the time was a major bank. And we'd be out of money, and I'd bring him an investor, and he'd say, they're not good enough for us because I need JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs. They're not good enough for us. And I'd say, do you have any money? And so we would end up taking the money. But I think there's a hierarchy here, which is, number one, if you have no money, you'll probably take any money you get. if you have choice, I think that probably the most important thing I would look for is chemistry. Is this someone you can work with? It's like a marriage, so can you work with them? Number two, do they understand what you're trying to accomplish? And I think those are probably the most important things.
How fast did you get the money from the initial talk
Yeah, so I talked to a lot of first-time entrepreneurs who are out there raising money, and I think that the basic rule of thumb is it takes forever. I mean, it takes about 6 to 12 months to raise a round, and you have to be conservative about it. But the reason is because you have to get your stuff ready, start reaching out, have follow-up meetings and stuff. Do you want to?
Yeah, let me add to that. So, I mean, to George's point.
Talk about institutional.
Yeah, so a couple of things. I think I'll just sort of elaborate on some of the comments that George has made. I think George kind of hit it on the head. The reality is, I think for early startup companies, the likelihood of getting sort of a pure institutional investor right out the chute is probably relatively low. We've seen a general trend across the board. It's the people who used to be sort of early stage seed investors, they've all moved up the stack. And the reality is they're becoming more late stage investors, right? So if you look at all the statistics and look at sort of who's getting funded and how they're getting funded, most companies actually have some degree of maturity to them. So the average now, I think, if you think about it from the formation of a company, it's about 2 to almost 3 years before they get true institutional funding along the way. And I think from George's perspective, trying to network early on, and I think a key to that is at the early stage, trying to create an advisory board that can help you in that capacity. And in some instances, you may want to actually add somebody who comes from sort of more of a traditional sort of finance background, who has networked and done a lot of work with guys on the other side. I'll give you a good example. There's a company down in Santa Barbara, Hotbed, but it's a company called Phone Halo that competes with Tile, and so they've been around for about 3.5 years. They've been pushing really hard over the years to try to get institutional funding. Never really there. So they went to angels and sort of entrepreneur funds to kind of provide sort of drip financing along the way. Well, they've done a great job of kind of working their network, and I actually made an introduction to them about 3 years ago to the Foundry Group that was one of the backers of George's company. And at the time, they're like, not the right kind of company for us, didn't have the right messaging. And I think that's crucial too, as you develop sort of the pitch, if you will, about how and why it's important to make an investment in the company. I think the 2 points I think you really want to make sure is that it's an addressable market that has some unique sizable component to it. That's something you do want to spend some time on. Then really, the bulk of the presentation of the pitch deck is what's different about you. How are you going to take the share when it's all said and done? And because they're money investors and they want to make money when it's all said and done. So 3 years, fast forward 3 years. I mean, literally last month they just got $6 million from Foundry. So 3 years ago, it didn't quite fit. They got the messaging down right. It went originally from sort of a tracking device, consumer tracking device, to a messaging that's around. The whole vision was there. They just didn't have a good way of condensing it. It became more of a crowd GPS play, and much more richer than, hey, I can find your iPhone. We got a device that can find your iPhone or your keys. So that's sort of the whole. I think when you think about where you guys are when you're sitting there, it's going to be challenging to find it, and it could take you a bit of time. But to get pure institutional money in the first round, if you work it hard and kind of create a rapport with these VCs, and they're happy to see you on a pretty regular basis because they do want to track the companies. So don't feel hesitant to put a call in, or every 6 months ping the partner or the principal that you met at Kleiner or Sequoia, or whatever fund it may be, to say, hey, I just want to sit down with you, give you an update of what's going on in our business. And you will find that as you do that, you create sort of credibility with the ability to say, hey, remember what I told you we would do? Well, we're starting to hit those milestones now. So I would definitely say, be focused on networking as hard as you can, and always take that meeting, and always try to push to get that meeting.
Questions?
Have you ever been upset that you took too much money? Too much.
Never.
That's my point. I hear a lot of people say, oh, we don't want to give too much dilution or take too much.
So I want to add to that point because I've seen enough companies do this, and dilution seems to be a really hot point, I think, for a lot of companies. It could be, and it's interesting. Sometimes it originally starts with sort of the founders when they're trying to raise the first round of money. They're like, I just don't want to give that much up. And so, and then sometimes you'll see it when you do provide enough maturity where an institutional investor will come in. They also get very concerned about sort of dilution going forward as new investors come in. As a rule of thumb, I know it's hard to kind of swallow the dilution component to it, but we always talk about this. Owning 100% of zero is zero. And so if you can take every last dollar that's available to you, you should take it. Everything takes twice as long, costs twice the amount of money that you think it was going to do. It was going to take you to achieve wherever you wanted to be in some time frame. So, I can't tell you how many times I've seen companies, and market volatility controls some of this too. You just know that if the capital's available, you don't know if it's going to be available in 6 or 9 or 12 months. I can't tell you how many companies I worked with back in sort of 2008 timeframe. They had deals lined up for $20, $30 million, disappeared overnight. When the market started really coming apart, they will absolutely walk away. So take the money. I mean, it's painful right now, but it's a short-term pain.
What I like also is that, if you're taking it right now, you get a certain amount of dilution. If you're so desperate that you're taking it at the end and you need a bridge, a lot more dilution later on.
Right, yeah, and also, particularly millennials, I'll have talks with them, they go, essentially in their minds, they're going to be the next Snapchat. And so they're thinking like, I'm giving away an extra $3 billion or something like that. And this is a company that, they haven't even built a product yet, and he's worried about losing it, And as James said, there were companies in 2000, 2008, at every major crack where the ones that survived took too much money, and it's much better to have a percentage of a viable, valuable entity than 0 or 100% of a dead company. Other questions?
So, getting money.
He's been holding his hand up several times, so let's get. Oh, okay.
So raising money is basically having people convinced that you have a good product. From someone who's raised $500 million, has convinced people to give up $500 million of their own money, how do you set yourself up for success when it comes to those conversations?
Well, I'll talk about it, and then let's see what James has to say. But overall, probably for the last 20 years, part of the game is to pre-select high probability entities. And so the reason I say that is because there's a reason Sequoia and Benchmark and Excel are always killing on the deals, because they're picking a better pool of companies. So it's kind of self-selection that they get the best deals. And so I've tried to be more selective over the years to say, I'm going to do this company because we're solving a big problem, big market, things like that. And so what I've tried to do is ratchet down the risk that a company can make it or not. So that's the starting point right there. And the other thing is I just look for additional features where I'm pretty sure that proper execution can take the company to the next level. With Author, it's doing about, my current company is doing about $15 million a year in revenues. It has a platform, it has Fortune 500 customers, it's young, it's undercapitalized, it's under-managed, if you will. But I'm raising money, and I know if I execute, it's going to do well. So, so part of it is just like stacking the deck before you even do it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think what I would add to that is just be crisp on your messaging with whatever party is sitting on the other side. They really need to understand that at the end of the day that you have a real good handle of what's going on and how to best execute because they're investing in you. The other component I would add to that is do some homework as well, and that means doing research online, but also talking to people who've had companies that have had prior investors. You're going to have a higher degree of success if you can identify investors and specific investors within that fund who have knowledge in your area, who may not be specific to where you are, but have done stuff around that area. The more you have sort of bought in vision and bought in sort of, hey, I believe this is the right place to be, because at the end of the day, it's a risky investment when they're making this. Most companies actually fail, if you think about it. And they get enough home runs to kind of make the fund work, and then they exit, about 50% on kind of a M&A perspective and kind of make some money on it, but everything else kind of not so great. So you need to find that right sort of partner who can understand the vision right away, and sometimes, it could be a particular partner that, if you look in the face of things, hasn't really invested in this area, but just through your networking, through people that you find out that he or she has a particular passion for this area and has spent some time in it recently, or has a personal sort of calling to it, and hasn't really found the right investment. And so that's what I would sort of counsel you and say, look, just be thoughtful and do your work.
Can I just add one thing? The other thing I think that early entrepreneurs aren't doing enough of is you've got to go out and try your pitch out on people, and that could be on your poor family members, your dog, or your friends or your former friends and things like that. But the reason is that like with Author, I've been there 6 months, and I probably presented on our company maybe 500 or 600 times already. And the first time I had no idea what I was talking about. I still don't actually, but it sounds better. And part of the thing too is that when you go into these presentations with anybody, I always joke about it, but if you remember the Three Stooges, you get poked in the eye like this, and it hurts. But the next time you go in like this, of course they go like this to you. But then the next time you know to go like this and like this. So my only point is you get better and better at the pitch over time, and it's an accretive thing.
Did he ask this question yet? I got it.
So I think James may have answered this, but I would like to hear your opinion, and that is, you know, a lot of the stories you've told, you've raised money in all manner of ways. How important is to find investors in the focus area?
Is that for me?
Yeah, your view since.
Yeah, so the question is, how important is it to find an investor that focuses in your area? You know, at a very high level, so my current company is doing essentially enterprise software for life sciences. So I think our desirable profile is a company that does SaaS, or a firm that does SaaS investing, or heavy in life sciences and understands those. So I think it's very helpful if they understand the nuance of these, because we're going through certain product evolution and growth stages where it's very helpful if our investors and our board understand why we're working on the problem, what we're doing. So I think it's very important, particularly for a company that has any specialized area of knowledge. Something more general, not as important. Okay. James.
Okay. So I noticed when I start pitching, there's like many buckets of investors, like 2, 3. So I have like 4 types of pitch deck kids towards each one of them. And
it's
it
called
actually
ninja.
works.
Ninja pitching.
There's the very aggressive one, and it's the very conservative one. When I talk about big numbers, they get scared. It's like, I don't believe you. And then that was the end of the conversation. So I started to understand the investors themselves to really choose which pitch deck.
Yeah, he's saying that he uses various pitches for different types of investors. Also, that nobody believes his numbers. I just want to tell you, nobody believes anyone's numbers in Silicon Valley. Has anyone ever used a hockey stick in a presentation? Do you know what a hockey stick is? It's the projection that goes like this. Yeah, you should always have one, and also nobody believes your numbers ever. That's why it doesn't, I don't mean this facetiously, it doesn't matter what your numbers are. Because nobody believes it.
He's absolutely right. The reality
nobody
is,
believes it.
Yeah, it's like they're going to beat you up on one way or the other. But if you don't come in with them, they're just, what are they smoking? Like, there's no business opportunity here.
It has to be a $3 billion company with a hockey stick.
So if the numbers aren't believable, how often do you go with your gut and before you invest?
You know, I think actually that's a very good question. I think it's more, it's subtle, and I do actually think they do make an investment a lot on sort of a gut feel. Part of it is they see a lot of presentations, they see a lot of companies, and see a lot of management founders walk through the doors. And I think a lot of it is, you know, when you're getting about an hour and a half with any prospective person out there who's likely to invest, they're making an assertion whether the person sitting across the table that's making this pitch is someone that they could actually work with and has some credibility. Like, I can see this person actually make this company work. And I can tell you that it isn't often, believe it or not, that the best product wins in the marketplace. It's actually pretty rare when that happens. Oftentimes it's the average product with the incredible management team that has a vision, the ability to execute and get people around and to buy into that vision, who are employees, and can create that passion and get that thing done. So I think as much as anything else, they're actually trying to see if that's something that they can glean in the meeting with you. Sometimes the best product, they're like, oh, great, I love the product, I don't know if this is the right group. You can still get an investment from them, but it'll probably be an understanding that love the concept, love the idea, love to make the investment. I'd like to bring some sort of, parent supervision to this if you don't mind. And don't make the investment, but the clear understanding would be within a reasonable time frame, there's a succession path that brings in a professional CEO who's done this before and has done, like situations. So I do think, in fact, it is quite a bit of a gut feel. Now they're going to test you on the numbers because they want at the end of the day, they want to know that you actually have the conviction that you can actually drive to that. Now, I think at the end of the day, they know it's highly unlikely, but they want you to work for them hard.
I have a question. Sir. My question is, you guys make a good point in terms of finding the same VCs that are in the same space. My question is, should we be worried as founders when talking to VCs who actually invested in a competitor?
Yes.
Can they give this information to a competitor?
Yeah, so I'll just make two quick comments. He's asking basically, should we be worried about the confidentiality of your plan when going to VCs who already invested in the space? I think so. One of the, as James said, you generally want to take the meeting because you can practice the pitch, and also you never know what's going to happen in the meeting. What's a slightly bad practice is there are some VCs who actually have no intention of investing, but they bring you in to help educate you themselves on a space, or they want to learn about the competitive landscape and use you for research as well. So I think you have to kind of make an assessment of whether that's going to happen or not. The other thing too is that I meet a lot of entrepreneurs who they say, George, I've got a great idea, but you can't tell anybody. I have this idea to put ice cream balls on a cone, and it's really an incredible revelation. I'm like, everybody's doing that, and my only point is that any idea anybody you've thought of, it's probably been thought of before. The question is, can you do it better? And in my own opinion, largely outside of certain very proprietary intellectual areas, good entrepreneurs tend to talk about their idea and then get perspective and keep on evolving it as a result of the conversation. And I think it's less effective if you hold it in tight. That's different from going to a VC. But a lot of very early entrepreneurs think that they can't tell anybody. And it's stuff like, I have this idea for a vehicle with 4 wheels, and nobody's ever thought of it, And so, anyway, do you want to?
No, I think George is absolutely spot on that, and I think at the end of the day, I'd be surprised if you guys haven't gotten calls from a lot of VCs along the way, and sort of associates who work for them. This is their job, to go out there and find companies. And the reality is, oftentimes you're getting an inbound call, kind of at this stage, they're doing market research on it, and that's okay. But you get your name out there, and you have an opportunity to go and kind of pitch the concept and the story to them. And they have some interest in it. So they may be looking at a company that may be in your area, but the reality is if you're convincing enough, you get on the radar screen, you may be the guys that they end up backing and not the other team that they're looking at. So oftentimes, you're not the only company doing it. I know, as George alluded to, it's oftentimes there's a lot of competitors out there. And it's okay getting the messaging out there, because I think the crisper you are with the messaging after repeated interactions with prospective investors, the better you're going to be, and you get a better vision of sort of how you want to pivot the company as things develop.
How much do you care about IP? Because it takes like 3 years to get a software patent now, and how valuable is a provisional patent, if at all?
Yep. Look, patents are better than not having patents. I think at the early point in your life cycle, you kind of have a decision you have to make on sort of research allocation. I think as the company matures, there's a lot to be said about having patent protection and trademark protection, but really around IP protection. At the early points, to the extent that you can provide some provisional stuff, it's relatively less time consuming. Yeah, why not? Go for it. But if it's going to significantly slow you down, I think it just
is it ever a deciding factor? Is what I want. Is it ever something where you go, if only they had a provisional, I would have invested?
I would say it's rare at sort of the early stages. It does become more important as the company gets to some size and they're concerned about companies already on the radar screen of big competitors out there. What do they have to kind of protect themselves? But earlier startups, stage, it's been rare in my sort of experience to say that it's a sort of tipping factor with early stage VCs. George, I don't know if you have a view on that.
I think you said it all.
Question. So you built and sold 4 companies. When is it time to sell? How do you figure that out?
Well, it's funny because one of my board members, he was founder of a company called Postini. I don't know if you know, sold to Google for $600 million. And he would always tell me, George, it's better to be bought than to be sold. And the inference is that when you're viewed as valuable, somebody will swoop you up for the maximum price. And so I think it's highly desirable to be bought versus sold. And then at least in one case, I was running out of money, and so I had to go find a home for it. So I had to go out and hire a banker and sell the company. But I think it's, I think in terms of time, I think you kind of look at the stage of the company and see what your target return is for your investors, where you're valued at, what you can get the company sold for, and I think those are factors. I have a friend who's a billionaire, and I asked him, how did you get so rich? And he said, I sold too soon. You know, and, so I think that's summary. I sold too early. So yeah. The other thing is that the one thing I want to stress about raising money, it's a numbers game. And so for any of those who have done either brick and mortar dating or online dating, if you don't ask anybody out, you're never going to go on a date. If you ask a lot of people out, no matter what a hideous person you are, you'll probably get on a date. In 2003, we were in the nuclear holocaust of Silicon Valley, and working for a Kleiner Perkins company, which at the time was a very hot firm, and we were trying to raise money, and the valley was just completely dead, and I contacted 400 VC firms around the country, including and also overseas. So 400 firms outreach. We got 160 meetings and about 40 due diligences, and we got 1 term sheet, and we closed on it. But my only point is that it's a numbers game, and sometimes I think early entrepreneurs will go on the first pitch, and it's not great. They're going, "Oh, we're never going to get funded." They went on 1 pitch, So it's a numbers game, and you got to get out there. And that's why I said plenty of Lexapro, drink plenty of fluids.
Yeah, it's like baseball. I mean, literally, you're a winner if you can hit 300 in the major leagues, right? And that's absolutely the case. The average company will probably talk to 150 to 200 prospective investors out there in the early stages when they're looking for money. And out of that, you're going to find 1 or 2 guys that are going to step up to the table and write you a check. So it takes a lot of perseverance on your end to get that money in there. And to the earlier question on when's the right time to sell the company, you're always selling the company. The minute you've started the company, you're
ABC.
You're in sell mode. At some point, if you think about it, we're going to kind of peel it back, you're really selling. You're actually positioning it to be sold one way or the other, even at the early points in life. So you'll find that I think as the company evolves, you'll know when it's the right time to sell. You'll oftentimes, for companies that are bought, they kind of laid the groundwork already for years with prospective buyers through their own sort of marketing and corporate development efforts. So, to say that they were bought, yeah, they were, but they were actually selling along the way to make sure that they got noticed by these guys. And then as you get to be more mature, George is absolutely right. You've got to look at sort of what the return is. It's relatively simple in some capacity to get to about 20 million as a technology company. After that, it becomes much harder. And that's where the valuation creep becomes harder to achieve. So you'll see a bigger ramp up to that 20 million in revenue. And once you get to about 20-ish, it becomes really kind of interesting to a lot of guys from an exit perspective. It proves that you've had market receptivity, much more so than if you're a $5 or $10 million company. You've got a real customer base, product that has some meaningful impact out in the market, and probably can be with the appropriate infrastructure in place of the larger entity, get to be a much more important solution in the marketplace. That's when people get to be interesting, I think, from a exit perspective. And then if you can actually scale the business at a 70 or 80% clip after the 20 million, then you kind of keep going at it because you're actually creating significant exponential value in terms of your exit. It's when it starts slowing down, becomes, call it 50 or lower, that you should then say, okay, it's getting a lot harder to achieve, and the value creation becomes much more difficult to get in terms of exponential growth.
So when you say 20 million, you mean the sales is 20 million?
Yeah, yeah. If at 20 million, it's if you become more attractive because it takes a if you think about a prospective buyer out there, they're roughly almost expending the same amount of resources and effort to buy a small company with just a product with no revenue than it is to buy a $20 million company or a $50 million company or a $100 million company. And so, from their perspective, what's the bang for the buck? Does it actually turn the needle for them? You could be the next acquisition target for Google when they look at this and say, oh, no revenue, but they've got some sort of metrics that are so compelling that this get off our user base, this thing will explode. I can charge $1 and it's a $1 billion company. So that's a different sort of component. But if you're a software company, for example, yeah, it's a tough task to ask Oracle or SAP or any major company out there to come step in and buy a $5 million revenue company. Oftentimes they're looking for a 50 or 100, $200 million company to make it meaningful for them and to actually turn the needle.
Can you shed some light to help all of us on, we talk about revenue, but for a company like WhatsApp that get bought like $19 billion and make zero, and but get the growth into user base, can you explain the math here?
Yeah, the math is exactly right. They're using a user-based metrics on it. So those who effectively signed up and used for it, it's the same. It's a thing. If you think about it, right? If they could charge you $1. All of a sudden there's a $1 billion revenue if they wanted, right? So they're looking at some of the components of that. Sort of how much does it cost them to actually acquire a customer, quote unquote. And so that's the metrics that are being calculated in that as well. So.
Why don't you talk about YouTube, how much it cost, where it was, and where it is now?
Gosh, I don't know the specific metrics on that anymore. It's been a while.
Well, YouTube was bought about 10 years ago.
About 10.
Was it like two or 3 billion?
A little over 2 billion.
Yeah. So yeah, YouTube came out of the box and was very, very popular, and got snapped up for $2 billion by Google at the time where it really had no revenues, had no revenue model. But the premise that Google bought it for was that it was an incredibly useful application with explosive capability and explosive user adoption, which is why they bought it. And today, I don't know what the revenues are, but they're probably generating billions in revenue from that. So it was actually a bargain, but at the time, it wasn't monetized, and who knew? But it's an example like WhatsApp, which is
or Waze, right? So it's what mapping technologies on a mobile device is probably the second most utilized thing on your cell phone, right? They have a massive user base, and so for Google, that was an attractive component for them to be able to develop their own and then acquire every user. The cost of getting a new user on, it's costly, and that's essentially intuitively sort of the math they're making in their head.
It's still a big risk, I think, personally, because it looks like 350. I think there was 350 million users, maybe 50 million users per month. But to put numbers behind that, I don't know.
Yeah, the pricing on some of these deals is quite arbitrary, and WhatsApp, Snapchat, things like that. Another example is, I think this was more tangible, but PayPal was a private company, 15 or 20 years ago, and started emerging as a very, very strong company. They filed for a public offering, an IPO, and that's when eBay snapped them up. And I think eBay paid like a couple of $1 billion for them, which was considered expensive at the time. Whereas today, PayPal has much stronger prospects and bigger than eBay. But again, it's about the trend and the momentum of the company or whatever. So let's see. Some other things about raising money. Let's talk about just valuation in general. So a lot of people say like, number one, what do I raise money with, what instrument, and also what's the valuation thing? So I'm just going to make a few comments and then turn it over to James. So, in the old days, what would happen is someone would create a company and deplete their savings, deplete their friendships, and then be ready to raise money. And they would spend like 50 years of their life doing this thing and then go raise institutional money. And then the angel investor would say, I'll give you $50,000 for half of your company. And the guy would go, that's insulting. You're telling me that my company's worth $100,000? I've spent more than that. And then the investor would say, you should be grateful. You have no product, no revenues, no business plan. I'm doing you a favor. And so you can see that there's an emotional divide at an early stage company. And it's very difficult to value the company. And that's why most companies have gone to convertible debt and bridge financing. And you guys probably know this, but the way it works is you take $1 million and it's a loan repayable in about 24 months. During that 24 months, presumably you're going to build value with their money and then raise a bigger equity round, which makes the company very valuable, and their debt converts into that at a very discounted price. And if you don't raise money, they take control of your company, but there may not be anything in that case. But my point is that the reason that everyone's using convertible debt is because, as they say, kick the can down the road, which is defer the whole discussion of valuation because of that initial dynamic I mentioned.
So let me add to that. I think so that's clearly sort of, there's a general market trend toward that. There's also, as everyone knows, sort of founder funds that are coming and providing some seed financing. But when you're looking for like real Series A money from an institutional investor, it's a bit of a tricky component to it. It's more art than it is science. You're going to provide projections. They're going to kind of sift through it, and oftentimes people will tell you, well, they're valuing you based on your revenue projections, and there's some truth to it. They're also looking at sort of the total addressable market, figuring out at the end of the day what percentage you guys could potentially get. A lot of it, however, is predicated on the fact what's the return metrics that they need to get in the fund, and how much money do you need to kind of get to a specific milestone that they say, okay, this is creating some real next step value that they can step out the value, get some more money on. And then they literally go into a black box and say, okay, so the company needs $5 million. I need to own about 20-25% to make my return work based on the hurdle rate that I'm looking at. Oftentimes that's how valuation is set. It's a little bit of a sort of a black box gut art component to it. Where your numbers, you could argue, I've heard investors say, well, gee, I'm going to do 30 million in 3 years, right? And my company's worth, SaaS company, it's worth 150, 500 million. I don't. Some obviously think it's worth 5x, some think it's worth 10x, and at the end they, well, what do you agree on, right? But oftentimes when you're getting the first round of money in and you're relatively young, the fund's really looking at sort of, okay, again, what does it really take to get the company to the next big step? What's a reasonable valuation to get there, and from what I would probably need to own, kind of post the investment, that I know that in sort of the 5 to 7 year time horizon that I'm going to exit, I can make a 3+X return on the investment. So that's sort of the math. It's a bit backwards in some respects.
Okay.
Do the two of you speak at Stanford and Berkeley? And if not, why aren't you teaching there? Because this is extremely valuable information and insight that helps so many budding entrepreneurs.
I think we're only here because Dia tricked us into being here.
It's true. He came from Australia just for this.
Yeah.
There's smart people in here too.
She tricked us and she said, do you have that November 12th open? Oh, I've already told 100 people. I've sent out the invitations. So anyway, yes.
George, you've managed a lot of companies under different circumstances. Have you ever managed them with an eye toward achieving a specific compound annual growth rate for your exit multiple? Or is it just take the revenue where it comes?
Let me think about this. So it's funny because in Silicon Valley, I'm sure everyone here reads a lot of blogs, and also we see speakers all over the place, and they're pounding their chest and they're tweeting like crazy and pontificating about whether it's a bubble or not, and all this stuff. So anyway, there's all this advice about how to run a company and how to create a great exit. For me, fundamentally, the focus is let's create value for the company, which will create growth and create cash flow. And so if you do those things, everything else will take care of itself. People will be interested in buying you. But I think a big mistake I see is that, particularly in Silicon Valley, is that we only hear about Uber and Airbnb and these exceptions, and those are like 1 in a million. And then everybody else thinks that they watch. Has anyone watched the show Silicon Valley on HBO? That thing is so realistic, it's scary, isn't it? Oh my God, it's like the double FU close on the VC or whatever. But anyway, so I think there's a lot of misdirected focus by a lot of smart people in Silicon Valley who they hear this is how it's done and they do a certain thing or a certain management style or a certain focus. But for me, it's about creating value in a big market and creating cash flow in a business. And if you do that, everything else will work.
I think you're right. I have nothing to add on that.
Do you guys pray to God?
Pray to God?
I pray a lot. Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I want to say is that, especially with early entrepreneurs, they go out there and start pitching their business, and then and you have to have a thick skin because your really good friends will say this is a dumb idea, and then the people you don't know so well will kind of start reading their BlackBerry or their iPhone while they're talking to you and start sleeping or something like that. But you have to have a thick skin. But the one thing I think that with the best entrepreneurs, they keep on processing the feedback, good or bad, and so they keep on calibrating what they're working on. And the reason I say this is that there are companies that start as one thing and end up as something completely different, and they really crush it. And so there's value in the interaction, and there's value in the feedback, good or bad. And the good entrepreneurs are processing that. And so I would say for any of you who are doing a startup, I can almost guarantee that whatever it is you're doing today is not what you're going to do later on. With this internet banking company, it was in the 90s. The founder, his idea of banking was he had a modem-based telephone. It was a modem-based telephone, and you picked it up, and it had an LCD on it, like an ATM. And so it was a dial-in banking thing, and that was his vision that it was going to take over the world. And I said, "You're effing crazy! This is a dumb idea." And he had this clay model of a telephone that he carried around with him, and I still have one of these phones in my office as a memento. And then we secretly developed an internet banking version and went public with that, So, but whatever you're doing, it's going to be different.
What do you mean secretly developed? Just a joke, I'm assuming.
No, we had a stealth, couple of stealth developers who created. We went from a modem phone to a PC dial-in version of internet or of banking during the AOL days, and then we had like a rogue developer and a product person kind of design an internet UI and everything else. And then we showed it to the guy, and he said, "I hate it," and then we did it anyway.
So you mentioned value a couple times. It's really abstract. How does a founder know that he's really creating value for a market?
Well, I think at the end of the day, if you're, you're getting sort of pull through from the marketplace that says, "Hey, this is actually a pain that we have," and you may not have the product in hand, but it's something that you've got the right sort of vision that aligns with the customer base that you think you want to kind of attack and they have a need for it, then you're kind of on the right path when it's all said and done. And oftentimes you can actually find that they will do some co-development with you if they find it compelling enough. There's a company I'm working with now that's exactly the situation where they had sort of a front-end component but not a back-end billing component. And they had such a pretty slick sort of front end that one of the large customers at the end of the day said, "Look, I would actually use you guys if you could integrate into a billing system, but you know what? I'd rather just go to one place to have this. There's some competitors out there, but you've got such a great front end to this that have you thought about doing this?" Well, we don't have the resources. So they did some co-development, some mapping, and some vision work together. And ultimately, the company put in $5 million of a strategic round, and we're going to go raise $35 million off that $100 million valuation that the strategic put in. So oftentimes it's not, it's not always the VC that comes in first. But I think you create value when the end-use customer tells you that you're helping them potentially solve a problem they need solved, and you'll know.
Maybe one more question, and then I think you had a question too.
Yeah, so can you speak a little bit to using investors once you start getting investors on board, using investors as a resource to not only, of course, get more money, but also grow your business? And how have you done that? How have you approached that in your career?
George, do they really help at all, or does it just come to the board meetings and eat lunch?
Well, in my youth, I would always tell people when I was on the street, my company takes only the smart money. We have the smart money in our company. Now I realize it's an oxymoron, but now we look for dumb money. We want their checks. Don't call us now. But I think that let me think about this. It's a fantastic thing if you have an investor who can really help you in the business, either through introductions or sector knowledge or operating experience as a CEO or an executive. So I think it's fantastic to have. I think that what's really tricky in Silicon Valley, and so I've had investors from Silicon Valley, the East Coast, from Europe, Japan, everywhere else, but in Silicon Valley, there's a slight danger that you'll have a Stanford MBA who's evaluating your deal and who's on the board, and they may have gotten lucky on a couple deals and made a lot of money, but they really have never run a company. And so there's an irony to me that over the years I would be on Sand Hill Road and we'd be in these lavish offices with these very attractive 35-year-old women with a chignon and chocolates at the front counter, that thing, and water bottles. And they'd be lecturing me on burn rate and conserving, and also, ironically, my companies were thriving or on the way to exit. The VCs who I was talking to were actually going out of business and not getting the next fund. And so there's a danger of this in Silicon Valley. But one of the best investors board members I had was Scott Petrie. He was the founder of Postini, Google executive, and he's now doing another startup. And I'm a little biased towards having former executives or founders primarily. And a good board member or investor will help give you feedback. They will not try to intrude on the company. They will also, on request, give you valuable introductions as opposed to ignore your request or your follow-up. And they'll follow through with commitments that they make to you.
Yeah, I think that's actually an important component. I think when you look at investors out there, there's sort of two kinds. There are those who've actually come through sort of the operating side of the world, and those who are just financial guys. And they can be both helpful, just in different capacities, right? The operating partner who happens to be on your board through a fund can provide incredible amount of insights or how the mistakes that he or she made along the way, or companies that they've worked with, they have, I think, a much deeper appreciation sort of what it's like to be on your side of the table. And can be really additive and really supportive along the way. And you should obviously look for a good mix of that, because the financial guys can help you as well, because they can help you with from a financial perspective, how best to deal with contracts, partner agreements, cap table issues, things of that nature, option plans. May not sound like a big deal, but over time it does make an impact. But they can also add a lot of value is ultimately your exit. When you think about sort of how you want to get to the end game, they're much more probably astute at being able to find the right perspective introduction for a buyer, because that's sort of their mindset. How do I sort of set the company up for the appropriate sort of exit? One thing I would say, and I think George is correct on this as well, Silicon Valley is an interesting place. Most board guys, I think, from a venture fund, they're probably sitting on probably a dozen boards. The reality is you're not getting a ton of time from them, and they're really kind of half joking about them coming into the meeting and having lunch, but the reality is they've got so many things on their plate that the reality of them spending a ton of time with you is probably pretty limited. I think if you can try to find a good mix from a board perspective, obviously get the VC in who's got who sees your vision, but I think if you balance your board out with operating guys who've kind of been in the area, can provide some insight and some assistance along the way, I think you get a lot of bang for your buck, because they may be helping other companies, but it's not at the same level in the magnitude. And I think George is right too. You want to find the VC that wants to be helpful but not super intrusive. And there are some guys out there who are very hands-on. Look, your company's struggling, they're going to be hands-on. There's no question about that. But they oftentimes the right partner, somebody there who will kind of take a seat back and say, hey, you guys are doing a great job. How can I be helpful? And that's when you want to be able to take advantage of that and use the Rolodex as much as possible. Sometimes they're not going to naturally think about sort of the opportunity out there that they could be helpful with, you've got to be proactive and think about sort of, hey, we're really thinking about maybe pivoting into this area or looking for a partnership in this particular sector. Could you help us? And that's when the light bulb goes off. Oh, actually, I do. I know 3-4 people that could be very helpful there. They could also be very helpful in sort of hiring, just from the sheer fact they've got a huge Rolodex of people they've worked with in the past. On the marketing side, sales side, product development side, they'd be extremely useful down the road.
So George, when is your next IPO?
I'm never going to do another IPO again. I'm totally serious. It's too much work. It's a pain getting beat up by investors on a quarterly basis, and so you can have an all-cash exit and take a vacation if you do a private company.
Very last one, very interesting. Had any of you guys ever done a reverse merger?
They're not really good.
Yeah, I would generally say there are a couple that have worked over the years, but I would not recommend that. Generally speaking, for a variety of reasons, but first and foremost, you've kind of already aligned yourself up. And it oftentimes is a situation, you're getting a little bit of money along the way, but it's a tough road to haul to get out there and get real credibility.
Well,
George? Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate you guys coming to talk with us both. A lot of great feedback that you gave us, stories, and taking questions from the group. Really appreciate that. So thank you. Thank you.